Good morning, Tim.
Morning.
My name is Rob Carpenter. We're sitting here with Larry Friday, and we have the honor to interview this gentleman, Tim VanRaalte. And this is for the Veterans History Project. And we're just going to have a little chat, and let's talk about your experiences. You starting out, in life and working through and going through and talking to us about your service and your years in the service. If there's anything you'd like to add at the end, that would be absolutely fine. But what I like to do is I always like to start with, kind of your life as a kid and when you were first growing up. Can you tell us where you were born, Tim?
I was born in Holland, Michigan. Lived in West Olive.
Okay.
Holland's the closest hospital. That's where our doctor was.
Yeah.
And I come from a military family. I mean, all my uncles on my dad's and my mom's side, all were World War II
Okay.
veterans.
What's your birthday?
10/13/53.
I was born on October 13th.
Really?
Small world, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's funny. So let's go back and talk about your parents a little bit and their names.
My mother was a baker with 2 Ks, and my dad was a VanRaalte, and I'm told that we're related to Albertus VanRaalte, who was the founder of Holland.
I'll be darned.
He came from the Netherlands because of religious persecution, and they started the Reformed Church
Sure.
in Holland.
What'd your mom do for a living?
She was a housewife until I was probably about 14 years old, and she went to work for General Electric.
Okay.
She worked on a line making motors for refrigerators.
I'll be darned. How about your dad?
My dad worked for Gardner Denver, which is out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but they had a plant in Grand Haven. He was a machinist.
He was a machinist.
Yeah.
And was your dad in the service?
Yes.
Okay.
He was in the Army Air Corps. We had a real hard time getting his stone because we were telling him he was in the Air Force, and he wasn't in the Air Force. He was in the Army Air Corps. He was in before there was Air Force.
Sure.
And once we told the guy, I took the paperwork out of my stuff because I found it, and showing that we got the free stone, and that he was out of the country 3 times during the war, and I had one uncle that spent the whole 4 years in Pearl Harbor, and he had some mechanical schools after high school, and when he joined the Navy, they made him a chief petty officer. He was E7
Okay.
for the 4 years he was in, and he basically worked the whole time rebuilding Pearl Harbor.
Did he? Nice. How about your siblings? Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Got 2 younger brothers and 2 older sisters.
Okay. Were any of them in the service?
No.
No? What did they think about you going into the service?
My younger brothers were 8 and 10 years younger, so they really didn't know what to think.
Yeah.
All they knew that I was going to leave, and I was their main pain in the ass. I teased them, I was the older brother.
Yeah. That was your job.
That was my job, and so what I got from them was they were kind of happy that I was leaving, because they got mom and dad in the house to themselves, so they each got their own room, and we had a cottage up north, and they spent a lot of time. I mean, that gave them, so they were kind of glad.
Yeah.
I don't think they even realized the significance of what I did.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, they shook my hand at the airport, but that's what my dad did.
Right.
He shook my hand and he said, "Do what you're told, do the best you can."
Yeah. Did you volunteer?
I did.
You did.
I did not volunteer for Vietnam.
Okay.
I volunteered for the Navy,
Okay.
and in boot camp, they test you. I mean, you spent your whole time in boot camp. We did some exercise, once in a while. We marched, and we had an M1 Grand that we carried. Didn't shoot, didn't fire. But they test you, and they find out where you're going to fit on the ship. Well, I barely graduated high school. It was because I was lazy. I didn't do my homework. I didn't study. They found out I had a extremely high mechanical aptitude. I got on the ship, I didn't know this till I got on the ship, and the yeoman who takes care of the paperwork, his office is right by the galley. And I was sitting down, and I'm just on the ship. I'm a new kid, just not a nose kid.
How old were you?
I was 18.
18.
You know, I was turned 18 just after boot camp.
Okay.
And I had a couple of schools to go to and then go to the ship. And I'm sitting down there, and first thing, the gunner's mate wanted to know if I knew how to shoot M16. And I told him I didn't know how to shoot M16, but I knew gun safety and knew how to shoot guns. Grew up on a farm. And when I asked him why I needed to know how to shoot M16, because I was an engineman, and I went to schools to work on the engines and the boats.
When you were in boot camp, you went to schools to work on it?
Right.
Learn that? Okay.
You know, that's what they decided, that because of my high mechanical aptitude, they sent me to air conditioning refrigeration school. So on the ship, I took care of, they had 2 big air conditioners, and I had to take care of them. If they didn't work, and be damned if we didn't pull into Singapore Harbor, and I had liberty, I couldn't go.
Right.
I had to work on the air conditioner.
Yeah.
It was broke. It was like, you can't go until it's fixed. And it wasn't a really big job, but a couple hours.
Yeah.
A couple hours when you only got 8 or so hours to go ashore. You want to know if I knew how to shoot M16?
Yeah.
And after 4 nights of practice, he said, you're ready. And he told the captain that I would take over as number 1 M16. I got a key to the locker, and I was told that I had to take care of the gun. And M16s were known to jam if they were dirty. Mine never jammed, but I never put it away dirty. Every time I shot that sucker, I took the back of the ship and I cleaned it.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me something to do. Plus, I knew that next time I picked it up, it was going to work.
You'll be ready to go. When you went into the military, you of course you signed up to go in. Why did you join?
Did not want to go to college, and was not ready. I was 17, and I was not ready to take a job for the rest of my life. And I had a buddy that talked me into the Navy would be a way to use up 4 years and make a decision of what I'm going to do for my life, and then possibly get to see the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the lucky ones, I consider, and I hit all the good liberty ports. I mean, Hong Kong, Singapore, 3 places in Taiwan. Taiwan, the Shore Patrol came on the ship the first night in Taiwan, and can't go in the pharmacies, they're off limits. Well, if you had greenbacks, you could buy 100% cocaine, pure cocaine. They'd sell you whatever.
Yeah.
They'd sell you uppers, downers. You had greenbacks, they'd sell it to you.
Yeah.
So we were told that if they caught us going in or coming out, you're going to go see the captain.
Yeah.
You know, so I wasn't in drugs, so it didn't matter to me.
Yeah.
And of course, then they told us certain bars to stay away from because the women were dirty, or they had dirty women, or whatever, or
Okay.
they had disease. But
When you first signed up, can you tell us a little bit about the experiences you had? You know, like going to boot camp, and then when you were in boot camp.
well, I went to boot camp, and I joined up with 3 guys, and the guy that was the main talker into or going never got in. He had bad knees and flat feet, and they wouldn't take him.
Yeah.
So me and the other guy ended up going together, and we went in as a buddy program. But the Navy's buddy program was that we were in boot camp together, and after boot camp, he went to the East Coast, and I went to the West Coast.
Okay.
And that's the last time I seen him.
That's the way it was. Yeah.
That's, you know, because he ended up going on an aircraft carrier, working on a flight deck,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to a gunboat. And then after the gunboat, after being out of CONUS, they call it, continental United States, if you're out of CONUS for 18 months, they have to send you back. So they had to reassign me to a different station somewhere in the United States. And what they were doing is all of my buddies, guys that I've been going to the schools with and went over to Guam and served on the gunboats, we all went back to Coronado Island, San Diego, to the amphib base. So we got back there, there's like 4 of us that have been together our whole time.
The whole time, yeah.
You know,
So when you went to boot camp, how did you get there? Do you remember?
bus,
Okay,
loaded the bus in downtown Holland,
okay.
Greyhound bus.
And away you went.
My mom wouldn't come with. My dad came and my little brothers.
Yeah.
And,
I heard you out in the hallway. You were talking a little bit about the experience when you first signed up with your parents. Can you relate that to us, please?
I had 2 buddies. One really talked us into going down, and we went down and seen the recruiter. And we went down and got the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only 17. Well, I had to have a parent, either father or mother or a guardian, sign for me to be able to join at 17. Yeah. And I came home and we were a typical family. I assume we had our dinner together. We had a big table and this was our night dinner. I mean, everybody talked about their day.
Yeah.
And my day was, well, I decided I'm going to join the Navy. I'm not going to go to college, I'm going to join the Navy. And my mom said, no way. She said, I'm not signing no paper that's going to send you to Vietnam. And I said, I'm not going to Vietnam, I'm joining the Navy. I said, the closest I'll get is probably the ocean, you know. And she said, no way. And she was kind of the boss. But there again, it was a typical family. My dad had the final say.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, where's them papers, boy? He called me boy.
Yeah.
I stood him over to him. He signed his name. And if looks were daggers, he'd been dead. My mom was so mad. She didn't talk to him for 2 weeks.
Wow.
So basically, my time before going in the Navy was bad because it was a bad subject. My mom didn't want me to go. And my 2 older sisters, their comment was, you don't want to join the Navy, you're going to end up in Vietnam. And there again, I told them the same thing. I said, I'm joining the Navy.
Yeah.
You know, if I was joining the Marines or the Army, I called them ground pounders.
Yeah.
I says, then you can expect, you know, that I'll be in Vietnam. I said, but the chances of me going to Vietnam are so slim. And I got a bunch of friends that were in the Navy, and they said I was lucky. Well, the Marine that got me hooked up on the LSD said I was lucky that I got to see combat.
How did you, or let me ask you this, why do you think your dad signed the papers?
He looked at my mother, and he said, I think it'll do the boy good. And that's all.
And that was that.
That was it.
Interesting.
And he knew that I hated school. I mean, and I had to graduate high school to be guaranteed a school in the Navy. You know, so the graduating all of a sudden became more important.
Okay.
You know, to me, because I wanted to have that school in the Navy. Because you go in without a school, you end up a boatswain's mate.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying nothing wrong about boatswain mates, but yesterday I was a civilian, today I'm a boatswain mate.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to. They give you a chip and hammer and a paintbrush, and I don't like categorizing people, but boatswain mate, they were a little bit slower.
Okay.
And that's what they got, is they got a paintbrush and a chipping hammer. And they had to take care of the ship.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, for a guy that was not very intelligent, didn't take much to show him how to chip paint and wire brush and paint. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a pretty simple job.
Yeah. So when you went into boot camp, you said you had air conditioning and refrigeration
School, you know,
schooling. Did you have any other type of schooling?
and then they sent me to it was a patrol gunboat. This was the ship I was going to,
Okay.
and they called it Patrol Gunboat Engineering School. It was on San Diego Naval Station, and they actually had pretty much everything that was on the ship. They had the diesel engines, they had the gas turbine, they had the reduction gears, and this ship was special, and they built it special with a gas turbine on it, and that's what powers the destroyers of today, is the gas turbines.
Mm-hmm.
They run one gas turbine down for each shaft. We had one gas turbine, and it split and ran both shafts.
Okay.
But the diesel engines, the two V12 diesel engines produced 875 horsepower apiece, so about 1,700 horsepower. And that would push us about 19 knots, maybe 20 on a good day.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd flip two switches, well, have to start the turbine up, but we had a General Electric LM1500 gas turbine. And we'd go from 1,700 horsepower to 17,000 horsepower out of that gas turbine. So we'd go from 19 knots to 43 knots.
Wow.
Our top speed was classified, but I know that we could do 43 knots because we were in the South China Sea, and our captain was only a lieutenant. So he's only 3 up from the bottom, low rank, but he's still a captain.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a captain of a commissioned ship. Well, we got out in the South China Sea, and there the Enterprise, the Bainbridge, and the Long Beach, all 3 nuclear powered, and the Enterprise was launching airplanes, so they were doing 30 knots into the wind, and they were launching planes. Our captain had us fire up the turbine. We passed him.
Okay.
And the captain of the Enterprise did not like that because they didn't know our ships were unknown. They only made 17 of them. They made them for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So he semaphored us 43 knots. What do you have for propulsion? Because they didn't know.
Right.
And they knew that steam wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And our captain just sent back jet engine. Because that's what we had.
That's
was a
what
jet
it was.
engine. It was and I was excited about going to this ship when I found out that it was a speedboat.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the fastest ships in the Navy.
How,
Now,
how
the
big
aircraft
was your
here-
ship?
146 feet.
Okay.
Got a story about that. I'm doing landscaping. I've worked my whole life landscaping. Working in a house, on a bike path actually, but in front of a house, building a retaining wall. And I don't know if I had a hat on or something that insinuated that I had been in the Navy. And the guy that was working in the house, he came out and he says, "What kind of ship were you on in the Navy?" And I said, "A 150-foot patrol gunboat." And he looked at me, he says, "Don't you meet 164 feet?" And I says, "Actually, you're right." I says, "It was 164 feet." I said, "But how would you possibly know that?" He was a civilian engineer. He helped the Navy build them, the
Okay.
gunboats.
Small world.
So I ended up bringing him a gunboat hat, a coffee cup, and something else
Yeah.
that I got at my reunions because
Sure.
they always have hats and coffee cups. And
Yeah.
so I brought it over to him, gave it to him. I kind of assume he's probably dead by now, but it was just somebody I ran into, and he knew about my, and it just shocked me that he was saying that it wasn't 150, but it was 164, and he was right.
Yeah.
But when you're talking to somebody you don't know that they know not much about the Navy, 150 foot, that's close enough.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing. I was thinking that he didn't know, and he actually was an engineer or architect,
I don't know.
and he civilian, but he worked for the Navy.
Yeah.
And
So when you came out of basic, was that the first boat you were assigned to? I mean, you went to training.
yeah, I went to
You
the
were trained
two
on those
schools.
boats. Yeah.
And the one school was actually the boat. I mean, they had the engines and the last day of the school, we fired up the turbine. I mean, that was
Okay.
it was like a 3-week school.
Okay.
You
So
know.
then from there, you went from that training. Did you go directly overseas then, or?
Went home on leave.
Okay.
They give you 2 weeks leave. And like I said, I left and didn't really talk about where I was going. I was going to Guam. I was going to the USS Crockett.
Mm-hmm.
But as I think I told you before, my mother knew. And I believe that she worked third shift at General Electric. And she worked with, they were all rough and tough. Go to the bar after work. The women that worked the third shift,
Yeah.
they were a little bit more crude, I would say, than my mother went to church twice a week. You know, went to twice on Sunday and then Wednesday catechism, and but she worked third shift at General Electric, and I gotta believe that one of them women told her,
Yeah.
"Your boy's gonna come home in a box if he's going to Vietnam." You know, because that's I don't believe she ever heard that song.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she wasn't in, I mean, religious songs. You know, not rock and roll.
Right.
And this was Woodstock. I mean, this was a song that was played at Woodstock, and she hugged me and she said, "Don't come in a box," and I started crying.
Yeah.
And it's like, she knows, you know.
Yeah.
And
So
of
there-
course, my brothers, they didn't know what was going on
Sure.
because I was crying, my mom was crying, and my dad just do the best you can.
Yeah.
So that's all I could ask.
So then you were, after your 2 weeks leave, what happened then?
Okay, got to Grand Rapids, flew from Grand Rapids to Travis, California. I get to Travis Air Force Base, I give my orders to the Navy desk, and the guy says to his buddy, "Hey, we got another one." I said, "You got another one? What?" He says, "Don't you know where you're going?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to the USS Crockett, PG-88, home port out of Guam." He said, "I don't care where your ship is home ported." He says, "But you're going to Saigon. Your next stop is Saigon." Because he opened my orders up and right there.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they never told me where my ship was at, it was in the war zone. So they would not divulge where it was at. So I left Grand Rapids, kind of thinking I was going to Guam, maybe the Philippines. And I get to California, and next stop was Saigon.
Saigon.
And that was the longest airplane flight I ever had.
Yeah.
Anchorage, Alaska, Yokota, Japan, and then Saigon. About 24 hours.
Wow.
And over Alaska, that plane was freezing cold. And they only had one really skinny blanket per person, because I asked for another one, and these were civilian pilots and stewardess. And we got to Vietnam. I don't know if you ever seen the movie with Charlie Sheen in it, Apocalypse.
Yeah.
He gets off the airplane in Vietnam, and they're walking, they're in country, and they're loading dead bodies. And they make the comment, "Is that what I think it is?" And it was. That's what I seen when I got off the plane in Saigon. They were pushing us. They wanted to get out of Vietnam because they were civilian, and they were a big target.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie had no problem of sneaking in and trying to blow up one of them airplanes.
Yeah.
So they were pushing us off, and I'm watching caskets going in, you know. So, I mean, a lot of that stuff in the movies is true.
That was real, yeah.
And it happened. I mean, they wanted us off, and they were pushing us. Let's get off. And as soon as we were off, they didn't even claim the new people were coming on, and they had our stuff off, and they were loading the dead bodies in the bottom.
Wow.
So that was my welcome to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Spent 3 days in Saigon waiting to get a flight and waiting for some more guys to show up. But we flew in a 2-engine prop job from Saigon to Vung Tau. And I didn't think that plane was going to make it. I mean, it was a piece of junk.
Yeah.
It was the type that the parachuter guys jump out of the back, because there were no seats.
Oh, okay.
You sat against the wall on a bench.
Sure.
No seat belts, no.
Yeah.
It was made for jumping out, and there were 4 of us, and there were like 20 Army guys, and we get to VanRaalte, and during the heyday of Vietnam, VanRaalte was a humongous R&R center. It's where everybody would come for rest and relaxation. You know, they'd give you a week off, not send you home on leave, but give you some time to go and drink and chase the women, whatever. And we get to this airport, there's nobody there. There's an Army bus. So the guy that was an E6, he was the first class, and he was going to my ship. He was actually my boss. He was my first class engineman. And he goes up to the Army guy. He says, hey, can we catch a ride with you? Because there was nobody else there. And this airport was empty. And he says, where are you going? And he says, our orders said we got to go to Cat Low, which was a PBR base. And he says, well, that's about 5 clicks the other way. He says, we're not going that way. He says, just walk out the road and catch a ride in the local jitney. Well, a jitney is a Honda 50 with a humongous box on the back. And there were locals. And I look at the guy, and I'm only 18.
Yeah.
And this guy has probably been in 10, so he's probably, close to 30. And I says, don't you think we should have a gun? He says, oh, we needed a gun. They would have gave us a gun. So I was a little bit shaken about that we're walking in South Vietnam with no guns. And so we got one of them jitneys, and there were probably 4 locals. And we got on the back, hung our sea bags, and I was carrying a intercooler for one of the diesel engines, which is made of copper, so it's heavy. And he had a great big antenna, so we had extra stuff beside. The guy driving the jitney had to hang out over the front wheel to keep it on the ground because we had so much weight.
Back, yeah.
But he wanted us because we had American greenbacks.
Money.
That's what it all was about over there.
Yeah.
And they wanted us to exchange our money. When I flew into Saigon, the guy sitting next to me says, is this your first time? Your first? And I kind of looked at him like, how stupid are you? I mean, I'm like 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I says, yeah, this is my first time. He says, well, this is my 3rd tour. He says, when you get off the airplane, he says, they're going to tell you to give them your greenbacks, and they'll give you, they call it funny money, MPC, military payment certificates. And what the deal was is you gave them a $5 bill, and they gave you a $5 MPC. Well, the $5 MPC didn't buy the same as a $5 greenback bought. He says, just tell them you don't got no money. Just keep your greenbacks. He says, you'll be happy.
Yeah.
Well, you go into the bars, they won't even sell you a beer with MPC because they don't want to deal with the military.
Sure.
They wanted the greenbacks. So that was my first learning experience when I, got to Saigon was keep your greenbacks because it was almost like they were double.
Oh, wow.
I mean, if you had a $5 greenback, it was the same as having a $10 MPC. And to find somebody to take the MPC, because when we got off the ship, we were dealing with the black market. I mean, the women, the alcohol, the bars were open for us, we could go to the bars. They put signs. They weren't supposed to know where we were at. We got to Singapore, welcome USS Crockett, on the door of the bar. And of course the cab drivers got a commission for bringing sailors to the bars.
To the bars, sure.
So I got just the place for you. And all you tell them is, we want alcohol and women. Got just the place for you,
You're
Joe.
right where to take you
And then he would get X amount of dollars
for doing
for
that.
doing that.
So when you took the Honda 50, I can't remember what you called that.
They call it a jitney.
A jitney.
Yeah.
When you took that up the road from when you landed at the
Yeah,
airport, did
yeah.
that take you to your ship?
It took us to Catlow, which was a PBR base.
What's a PBR?
PBR is a patrol boat river, and they made them especially for Vietnam. It was the start of the jet boats.
Okay.
It had two V6 Detroit diesels and two humongous jacuzzi water pumps. The Jacuzzi brothers helped the Navy build this boat
Okay.
because they needed something to go into the shallow water. And when you got a propeller and a rudder, you can't go in shallow water.
Right.
We needed 12 foot of water for my ship because we had a humongous propeller and big rudders.
Yeah.
And we needed 12 foot of water. Them PBRs could go in 10 inches of water.
So when you got there,
We had to wait 3 days,
okay.
and we went down the road to a local bar. Found out that didn't want to drink the beer over there. They put formaldehyde in the American beer, so you drank a Pabst Blue Ribbon. It tasted terrible.
Yeah.
And I was only 18. So, I mean, it wasn't like I needed a beer. And then the Vietnamese beer, the Tiger beer, was green. So you drink that, you get the shits,
Yeah.
you know? So the drinking part was almost out for me. And when I got on the ship, it took about 6 days from the time I landed in Saigon until I got to my ship.
Okay. And so you went from the PBR base.
Yep.
How did you get to your ship, or was your ship stationed there?
No, one of my sister ships, they would always travel in twos. So there were 2 patrol gunboats there. It came into the PBR base because this is where we'd come and get fuel and water and supplies. It came in first, and it picked us up and brought us out, and we met in the South China Sea with my ship, and we transferred over to my ship.
Okay. All right.
And that's where I spent the next 18 months.
Next 18 months. So during that 18 months, is there any stories or anything you'd like to, relate to the people in the future that are going to watch this video?
Well, the thing about getting there and having to learn how to shoot M16 and then having to shoot somebody, and that was within 2 weeks that I ended up having to shoot a kid who was going to bomb our ship.
Tim, before we go into that, your boat was what name again?
USS Crockett.
Okay, and how did you arrive at that name?
They came from cities in the United States. Crockett was Crockett, California. There was a USS Cannon, USS Asheville, and I was telling somebody,
Me?
Gerald Ford's daughter is one of a very few. She actually christened 2 ships. They made a patrol gunboat like mine, USS Grand Rapids, for Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I'll be there.
And because Gerald Ford was in politics, his 12-year-old daughter got to christen the USS Grand Rapids. Well, now here, 40 years later, they built an aircraft carrier, USS Gerald R. Ford, nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. She's one of a few got to christen 2 ships. She christened both ships. She christened the Grand Rapids and the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier. So, and I read that in the paper.
Yeah.
That it was noted that she was one of a few people that actually christened 2 ships in her lifetime.
Wow.
And it was because her dad was in politics, and the Grand Rapids was a small ship, so you didn't need somebody big.
Yeah.
And hey, Gerald Ford was in politics in Michigan, so they got his daughter.
To do it.
And then, of course, when he became president and they made the aircraft carrier, there was only sensible to get her to do it again.
To do it again. Yeah.
And that is kind of a neat, I mean, it's stuff, that, I pick up by reading the paper and, oh man, she christened one of my ships,
Yeah.
and then she christened one, and them aircraft carriers are just, I took my son, 16 years old, and we went to Norfolk, Virginia, to one of my patrol gunboat reunions. And they have a retired battleship, World War II. It's not one of the newer ones. And we were standing in line to tour it, and they wouldn't let us go because it was starting to rain, and the decks are teak, and they were afraid you were going to slip.
Mm-hmm.
But we walked around the outside of that ship, and my 16-year-old son's eyes were both, he said, my God, Dad, this ship is huge. Well, when you're looking at 800, well, the New Jersey and the Missouri, 858 feet. So the older ones are, probably 800 or 700 feet long, but they're still huge. And I said, I wish we could go on there, but they wouldn't let us on.
Yeah.
But he got to see my son. We have a banquet dinner on Saturday night. We went on Wednesday and we left on Sunday. And then Saturday night is the banquet dinner. And somebody had a slide carousel with slide pictures of where we're at in the rivers in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
In the river boats, the PBRs, the gunboats, the swift boats. On the way home, we drove. So we had pretty much a day. And my 16-year-old son says to me, he says, Daddy, he says, you've never talked about Vietnam. And I says, that's because it was bad. And I didn't feel it necessary to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, it looks like you're in some pretty bad places. And I says, yeah. I says, that's why I don't want to talk about it. And then he wanted to know if I killed anybody. And I had to answer him yes, because I wasn't there 2 weeks and I had to kill a little kid. And then I find out that we gave gunfire support, and then they told us that we killed about 600 people. For 24 days straight, we gave gunfire support for ground troops. And we were told we were depleting our ammunition because we were going back to Guam.
Yeah.
And we were actually giving gunfire support.
Getting support.
And I didn't find this out till probably 3 months before I got out of the Navy. I was at Saltcraft Unit 1, which is a shore station, Coronado Island, San Diego. And we'd get there at 7:30, and we had to muster in 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had a big boathouse, and we'd sit in there and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee and talk about what happened, last night or whatever. And we never seen our captain. I mean, he was a full captain, and his office was down the pier, and he had a office. We'd see him come and go, but he'd never come into our boathouse. And like I said, I was about 3 months short from getting out of the Navy. And we're in the boathouse in the morning. All of a sudden, the captain walks in. Attention on deck. Everybody had to jump up to attention. And he said, as you were. He says, but I want to know where Tim VanRaalte is. And nobody called me Tim, and nobody called me VanRaalte. They called me Van.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. He knows my name. And I said, here, sir. And his question to me was, why haven't you been coming to my inspections? I had missed 3 inspections. On purpose, I volunteered for operations to get out of the inspections so I could grow my hair long. I was getting out of the Navy. I wanted to, back in 75, everybody had long hair.
Yep.
So I was trying to grow my hair long. And he looked at me, he says, well, you got to be this Friday's inspection. Okay, sir. He turned around and walked away. So I went up to my LPO, leading petty officer, and I asked him, what's going on? He said, I don't know. What'd you do? I don't think I did anything. I was thinking I did something wrong. And what it was he had the medal, Notorious Unit Commendation, for us given the 24 days of gunfire support just before I left Vietnam. And it took them that long to find me.
Yeah.
Because I got transferred back to the States, and
Sure.
and then of course I was missing inspections on purpose
Yeah.
because I was getting ready to go home, and to be the mainstream, you had to have at least have your ears covered.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, everybody else had long hair, you know, and we were set aside. People knew that we were in the military,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part that I don't really like talking about, but we got treated like shit.
Yeah.
I mean, got told to travel in civilian clothes, don't wear your medals, and don't talk about Vietnam. And I was given a direct order not to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
So
I followed orders.
You mentioned that you were put into a situation where you had to defend yourself, and I know you talked a little bit about in the pre-interview out there. Would you like to share that story with us?
Yeah, well, I got on the ship, and the gunner's mate spent 4 nights with me, getting me acquainted with the M16. I had gun safety in Boy Scouts, I mean, so I knew gun safety, and I had a marksmanship badge from Boy Scouts, so I could hit what I was shooting at.
Mm-hmm.
And we only had 2 M16s on the ship. And the other guy, and I don't like classifying people, but he was a boatswain mate, dumb as a box of rocks. And they knew that I could hit what I was shooting at. So whenever we had a problem, they called for boarding party, but they always said, Van, go to the front of the boat or go to the back of the boat. And it was I was probably there 2 weeks. Already been approved that I was qualified on the M16, and I got called up to the forecastle of the ship, which is the front, and there's that little kid. He's got a bomb. He's gonna blow us up. And I believe it was sabotage, but we stopped at a South Vietnamese pier, and we got water in our fuel and fuel in our water. Now that don't happen unless somebody does it on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as we were dead in the water, nothing works. The guns don't work. And this kid's heading towards us. And what I remember, and this is a dream I have probably every week, shoot him, Van, shoot him. He's gonna kill us all. Our ship had a gas turbine for high speed, and we ran JP5 jet fuel. And if you've seen what the jet fuel did to the Twin Towers in New York, that's what it would have did to my ship. I mean, if he would have let that bomb off, we'd have been gone. There would be no ship.
Yeah.
And I was put in the position I had to kill or be killed. And I was just doing what my dad told me, and that was doing what I was told to do, and doing the best I could. And kind of makes me feel bad that I was a good shot, because the other guy didn't even come close. And I don't know if you ever shot an automatic rifle into the water, but there ain't no aiming. You can just follow the bullets, hold the trigger, and shoot until that clip's empty.
Mm-hmm.
And it only took about five rounds. And like I said, the captain came up behind me and put his hand on my back and told me I did a good job. And I seen the kid float past our ship. And the water was no longer brown, it was red. And I went to the back of the ship with the excuse to clean my gun. I got sick. I mean, I was 18 years old and I just killed somebody. You know, so I don't feel I did a good job. And they gave me a medal for it. And that's another reason I didn't talk about the medals I got with the people when I got home, because I got them for killing people.
Tim, how's that affected your your life after the service?
I was the guy that sat there and said post-traumatic stress is a bunch of bullshit. I was in war and I remember pretty much everything I did. And when my 16-year-old son went with me to Virginia, 2 months later, he died in a car accident. And that's when I started having the nightmares. It's after a traumatic experience with losing my son, what I did in Vietnam. So it was fresh in my mind, and my wife stopped sleeping with me. She was afraid of, because I was waking up and I was trying to kill somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I was going at it. And she's shaking me. And she stopped sleeping with me because she was afraid I was going to hit her.
Sure.
Not on purpose, not beating my wife, but wake up. Because that was the start of my post-traumatic stress. And it's done nothing but got worse. I see a psychiatrist with the VA. He does help. But when you have them dreams and you wake up in a cold sweat, it don't go away.
Yeah.
It's just something that your mind is a funny thing.
Mm-hmm.
It will put stuff away. But when it brings it back out, it brings it back out.
After all those years.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was 37, almost 40 years.
Yeah.
And I had not talked about it. When I get up to volunteering on the LST, I get a guy asking me if I was on there. Well, one, know when I was on the ship, the Crockett. And I said, well, I was home port of, I was on the ship for 18 months. And he wanted to know when I was in Vietnam. And I told him latter part of 72. And then he was Army, he had an Army hat on. And I never did much with Army. And he looked at me and he says, well, then you had to be on there the night you got hit with 2 rockets. And I says, how could you possibly know that? He says, we were told we couldn't talk about it. And I says, you'd have to be there. He says, I was there. He said, I was in the helicopter that saved your life. So I actually got to shake his left hand because he lost his right hand in a crash. But I shake, and I don't know if he was the mechanic, the door gunner, the pilot, what he was, but
Right.
he was there.
Oh,
He knew something that nobody was supposed to know.
yeah.
And it just floored me, that he's asking me if I was on there the night we got hit with rockets, because I was. And it was one of the nights I thought I was going to die. Because I was going outside with my M16, had the fire out. It was just an electrical fire, and got that out, and went and got my M16, and I was thinking I was going to die. We only had 2 M16s,
Mm-hmm.
and we were dead in the water. And the 2 twin 50s we had midships would work with electricity, but both of the gunners got injured from shrapnel from the first rocket that hit the ship, and they were wounded. So the 2 guns that could have helped us were not available.
We're not available. Wow.
So it just, and like I said, I opened the door, and it was almost like daylight. That helicopter had its big lights on, and they were lighting up. The machine guns on them helicopters could put out some lead. Most of them were 50 cals. And we had twin 50s, World War II. The 40 millimeter on the back of the ship, World War II, anti-aircraft gun. And I was the first loader. And I got on the ship, and I went to all these special schools to work in the engine. On the engines, the engine room, the turbine, the reduction gear, basically everything below decks.
Yeah.
And I find out that I got 3 other jobs, and the 3 other jobs I thought were cool, at the time. But the 3-hour jobs were, if I died, they could replace me easy. I was number 1 M16, I was number 1 loader on the 40 millimeter, and I was number 1 hose man on firefighting. So if there was a fire in this room, I'd be the first one coming in the door,
Right.
fighting that fire. And all them jobs were bad. I mean, death around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And what I figured out after going to the LST in Muskegon is I got those jobs because I was easy to replace. The chief engineman, he had a lot more knowledge, been in the Navy. In the first class, they were down in interim. I had all these bad jobs because if I died, they could replace me easy. They could go to the fleet and grab an engineman and get a E4 or E3 engineman and take my place. And I didn't realize that at the time, that I had these neat jobs because I was easily replaced.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you think bad of what you did, but I still am proud of what
Important jobs, absolutely.
I mean, I had to do some bad things.
Do you recall the day that your service ended?
Yeah, it was 1st of August, 1975.
Mm-hmm.
I had an apartment off base. When if you make E5 in your 4 years, which most people don't, and I guess with my high mechanical aptitude, the tests they give enginemen were simple to me. I mean, it was like I never studied. I just took a test.
Sure.
And I got advanced to 3rd class on the ship. And I'm sitting there, and the yeoman who takes care of the paperwork, he says, "Van," he said, "I didn't realize you were so smart." And I said, "I just barely graduated high school." I says, "What are you talking about?" I says, "I barely graduated high school." "What do you mean so smart?" He says, "Well," he says, "of the 24 men on this ship," he says, "you got the 4th highest mechanical aptitude score." He says, "That's why you're here." He says, "Because you got a high mechanical aptitude."
Mm-hmm.
He says, "That's why you got assigned to this ship." And there again, I just did what I was told. I took the test, and so I ended up getting back to California, and I was getting out in 75. Had no intentions of staying. Had a buddy that re-upped and got to $10,000, and that was normal. If they wanted you.
Yeah.
If they didn't want you, they'd just let you
go.
Or they'd let you sign up but not give you nothing.
Okay.
Well, I got talked to, I think it was December of 74. Wanted me to re-up. And he says, the only thing is, he says, we'll give you $10,000, give you a choice of a C school, which is it's a college level school. He says, but you're gonna have to go home on leave and get right back here. He says, because there's a float leaving to go back to Vietnam. We had to go back and pick up the people in the embassy in the summer of 75. We went back to Vietnam, and we got as many people. We had Marines and civilians in downtown Saigon in the embassy. And I don't know if you remember that in the news, but the Vietnamese were flying helicopters out to our ships, and they were letting the people on, but pushing the helicopters over the side.
Yeah.
Well, they wanted me to go on the float because I had already been to Saigon in the rivers. So I had been to where we were going, and I was qualified on an M16. And the guy says, well, you would be a plus to this float. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, a plus. I says, you got thousands of Benjamin. I says, you know what makes me special? And he says, well, I read in your file, he says that you had combat action. I says, you're talking about that I killed somebody? He says, yeah. Because they knew that they were going to have people trying to get on our boats.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to kill them to keep them off. And I says, well, if that's the plus that you want me to go, what happens if I say no? He says, well, if you say no, he says, you're due to get out in August. I'd been there. I'd been shot at. I didn't want to go back.
Right.
And I knew we were going to go to Saigon. I mean, they were going to try and kill us.
So when then you, after your service, you returned to overseas. You returned to Travis Air Force Base, and
Got there and they had buses, Army buses, and I needed the bus to go to LAX, to Los Angeles International Airport, to get back to O'Hare, to get to Michigan. So I get to my bus, to the LAX bus, all the windows are covered with chicken wire. So the Army driver is older than me. I'm only 20. And I get on the bus and I looked at the driver and I says, what's with the chicken wire over all the windows? He says, how long you been gone, son? And I said, 1.5 years. And he says, well, I'll be the first one to officially welcome you back to the United States. He says, you're a baby killer. And they throw rocks and bottles at us going down the highway. He says, the chicken wire is to protect you. He says, sit in the middle. Don't sit by the windows. And they didn't throw nothing at us. I mean, it was almost a year after the war when I got back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I mean, they were already done protest, and when we got off the airplane, you'd have somebody yell, there's them baby killers. And there was probably about 20 of us, military, and we were all standing together. I turned around and I looked at the guy and I says, the baby I killed had a locked and loaded AK-47 and was shooting at me. If you consider that a baby, I'm your man.
Yeah.
He didn't say nothing more. Turned around and walked away.
So when you look back at your experience, you know, and what you did through the service and everything that went on, was there any like specific life lessons that you took away from your experiences?
Well, being in the service, they like their people to follow orders, do what they're told, and that's what I did. I mean, my dad and his brothers and my ma's brothers or brother-in-laws, they're all in the military, all in World War II. And I just come from a military family.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I'm gonna do what they tell me. And if that was shooting somebody, and it, I don't know, maybe didn't make it easier, but it maybe seemed easier to kill somebody that was trying to kill me. I mean, I guess that made it easier for me to shoot and kill this kid, because he was gonna kill everybody on the ship. I mean, there was 24 guys. If he would have got close enough, we'd have been dead.
Yeah.
He was gonna die anyway. The bomb he had, because the divers went and got it, it was a magnetic bomb. Our ship was aluminum hull. Nobody knows that because they're all gray.
Yeah.
But it was aluminum. So for him to blow up the ship, he was gonna die. He didn't know that. I'm sure he didn't know that. He was thinking he was just gonna go and stick it on there, but he was gonna have to set it off.
Yeah.
But we don't want him to get close.
No.
I mean, and like I said, shoot him, Van. Shoot him. He's gonna kill us all. And instinct kind of kicks in, and I guess it's wanting to stay alive.
Yeah.
You know, that I got to do this.
Yeah.
And it just made it easier, I guess, that I knew he was trying to kill us.
Mhm.
Didn't make me feel better. I mean, I was brought up, thou shalt not kill,
Mhm.
you know, and that was,
So this, I'm sorry.
it was just eye-opening for, except when I got to Vietnam, I was 18. I turned 19 in Vietnam. So I spent October 13, 1972 in Vietnam.
Mhm.
And it used to be October 8th, my birthday month. My son died October 2. And then my birthday it don't matter no more.
Don't matter. Yeah.
October sucks for me.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's done,
Right.
you know.
Right. So this is going to be an interview that future generations are going to watch, and I really want to thank you for what you've done and your participation with this. This is, it's pretty incredible for you to take the time out of your life to sit down and show future generations and talk to future generations about what your experiences were and what you've been through.
I just volunteered last night. I belong to the Holland VFW,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a woman, she's a VFW, she's a veteran of Foreign War, and she put out a request for people to go and talk to high school kids
Sure.
and put my name on the list.
Good for you. What if there's a message that you could leave on this in our interview for future generations that'll hear this? What would you like to tell them?
Well, when I got back, I realized that war is no good. I mean, I learned a lot of life lessons, being in the situations I was in and having to do things that you were brought up not to do just to stay alive. But I don't push military, I don't push college on kids, but do something other than high school. Join the military, get a little something, a little edge. And when I talk to kids on the LST, when I volunteer and I get kids that are close to or 16, I tell them about my son. And you're driving a vehicle that can kill, and you gotta take that responsibility, And my son didn't kill nobody else. I mean, he was alone in his car.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't kill nobody else, but that'd be worse yet, if he would have killed somebody else. But so I don't know. The military's, we gotta have it, and we gotta have people. And the best thing I can tell is what my dad told me: is do what you're told and do the best you can. That's all they can ask. And as it turns out, most people's best is better than what you think. I mean, I ended up with 4 different medals, and it was for doing things that I never thought I would do. That if somebody would have told me when I was 16, you're going to be in Vietnam killing people, I'm joining the Navy.
Yeah.
But any service, just do what you're told. And that's, man, if you do what you're told and you do the best you can, that's gonna be good. And going to college is good. Join the service. I mean, something other than high school before you start your life's work. I mean, and that's what I was looking at. I wasn't ready to start my life of working,
Mm-hmm.
because I had a little bit of money. I mean, but basically, if I didn't join the Navy, I was going to have to get a job, and I was working for a landscaper, ended up getting out of the Navy and went back to work for him.
Yeah.
It was my uncle.
Yeah.
And when I got out of the Navy, I sat home for well, maybe 3-4 months and collected unemployment, $100 a month back then. And I thought that was ungodly. Way more than I needed. And then my uncle came over and wanted to know if I wanted to work for 2 weeks. That they were real busy. It was spring. And 22 years later,
He's still there.
I was still there. I actually retired.
Oh,
from
did
there.
you?
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
You know, I didn't see a lot of combat, but it wakes you up when you got somebody shooting at you.
Yeah.
And the fact that whenever you're at war, you're in danger. You're on the ship, being on the ship in a war zone. Everybody's sleep deprived because you're standing watches, you're working your 8-hour day, and you're standing 5 on, 10 off watches, and then general quarters. And they didn't really care about sleep. And the ship always seemed like there was something breaking. It was a new ship, but it was all new technology. Didn't have a transmission, had controllable pitch propellers, so the propellers moved. So the shaft always spun the same direction, and the propellers moved. And they were humongous propellers. But they made it, they built them in anticipation of this is what they're going to power the new destroyers with.
Mm-hmm.
I watched it was actually a sci-fi movie. It was Battleship, it was called. It was supposedly about aliens come from outer space and how they end up getting the Missouri out of Hawaii and bringing it out to sea and shoot the aliens down with the 16-inch guns. I just enjoy. And if I would have joined any service, it would have been the Navy.
Yeah.
Because I like the water.
Yeah.
I just always did.
That's awesome.
I had one buddy, and I ran into him in the school. They sent me to a school just before I got out in the hopes of me staying in.
Yeah.
And it was a salt boat engineering school. And there was 24 guys in the class. And there was a guy that came from a ship over 32nd Street. And when we introduced ourselves, everybody stood up and give your name and where you lived, where your hometown was. Well, I stood up and Tim VanRaalte, West Olive, Michigan. Well, this guy stands up. Well, I'm Warren Jansen. I'm from Holland, Michigan. He went to Holland High and I went to West Ottawa High School. And I looked at him and, well, it turns out he lives around the corner from me now.
I'll be darned.
And he ended up working for a buddy in boats. And we got talking one day and I said, I think we went to school together. And I went home and I looked through my records and I found the final day and I finished 4th out of the 24 guys. I was the 4th highest score. And there his name was, Warren Jansen. I went over to his house and I read his name, his social security number, which you're not supposed to have anyway,
Right.
and that the ship he was on. He said, how do you know that? I said, we were in the school together. Look, here's your name, here's my name.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I had finished 4th. He says, well, where'd I finish? I said, 7th. But there again, I just found the Navy test easy.
Yeah.
I had an old sailor tell me right when I first got in, he says, most every test you take in the Navy, they're all multiple choice. There's always going to be 2 answers that are completely wrong. He says, so if you know anything about what you're being tested on, he says, you can rule out 2 of the answers right away. He says, then if you're guessing, you got a 50% chance. He says, then if you are guessing, you're always best to guess the same letter. So I always guessed Charlie, unless Charlie was one of the answers I knew was wrong.
Yeah,
But if I didn't know and Charlie was available, I picked Charlie.
yeah,
And I always passed on top.
it worked.
Well, I got Saltcraft Unit 1. I took the test for E5. And like I said, most people don't even make E5 in the 4 years. And I'm walking down the pier one day and walk past the yeoman's office, and he yells at me, "Hey, Van." Yeah, I walk over to his office, and the same thing. He says, "I didn't realize you were so smart." And I says, "What are you talking about, so smart?" I said, "I barely graduated high school. What are you talking about?" He says, "You passed on the top of the list for second class." He says, "You're going to get your second class stripes Friday."
Nice.
Because the better you do on the test, the sooner you get your
Get your
stripes.
stripe, yeah.
And I got mine right away because I passed on the
You
top.
passed the test.
And I didn't study for it.
Mhm.
And it just
Just came natural to you.
things are easy
Yeah,
for some people.
Yeah.
My two younger brothers, ask them to get a crescent wrench, they wouldn't even know what it is.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I want to thank you very much for your time. I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us today, and especially sharing things for future generations. And on top of that, happy Veterans Day.
Yeah, no, I